apologise because the camera. Did anyone else just come up saying recording in progress? Or is that just me? That took me by surprise, if I'm honest. I'm going to start off with a massive apology to everyone. You may remember back last year at some point, I did the last our last sort of sermon for the church service on Zoom before we went back to the church. And I feel like maybe I celebrated a bit too much about us leaving. And possibly that's why we're back here now as a sort of punishment to me. I fully take that on as my responsibility, and I'm sorry. So as we can talk about, we are today looking at the Kings and at Epiphany, because obviously the 6th of January was Epiphany. We know that, the traditional day where everyone has to have all of their decorations down. Or at least in our house, that's a quite strong rule. We have had years where we've had to keep up a couple of decorations because we've missed them. And about halfway through January, we've gone, oh no, there's a Christmas card there, or there's something hanging there. And it has been up for the entire year for house visitors to comment on in the middle of August about why there's a particular bauble hanging from that shelf. Obviously, I don't think many people, a few years back, I commented my disgust that the church wasn't going to take down the Christmas tree until the 7th. And Catherine Sweatman told me off for being all superstitious within the church building. Obviously, that is not what Epiphany is really about. Now, I've over the Advent period, I was reading a book, this one here, Christmas, Tradition, Truth, and Total Baubles. And it was a very interesting book. It was filled with lots of facts in it, which I'm a massive fan of anyway. And there's a few things in it which surprised me, because I'll be honest, the majority of it was about debunking some of the like mythology and things that we do around Christmas. But one of the things which really surprised me is I learned that Epiphany is not the forgotten younger brother of Christmas, which it sometimes feels like, you know, just sort of tagged on at the end. It actually predates Christmas by 100 years at least, meaning that Epiphany is the forgotten older brother of Christmas in many ways. Epiphany, it started off in the Eastern Church, sort of after the church started splitting, because we did that very early. It's something the church is very good at, splitting apart from itself. And it was, the word Epiphany comes from the word of manifestation. And it was when the Eastern Church celebrated the manifestation of Jesus onto earth, as it were. It was the original Jesus origin celebration, as it were. And part of the reason why we have Christmas is because the Roman Church got jealous about the Eastern Church having celebrations. So they came up with their own, better, I would say better. They came up with their own one. And because it was quite close and because, you know, things mix about as time progresses, Epiphany Church sort of merged one to the point that Epiphany became part of Christmas and vice versa. Now, the really surprising thing I found out about Epiphany is that it was originally to celebrate the baptism of Jesus. It's like a weird part to celebrate your origin story of Jesus, as it were. Mostly they celebrated the bit where the Holy Spirit came down as a dove and of Epiphany. And part of that is they talked about the Magi coming to see Jesus, which I'll be honest, I've been looking at it's all Christmas. It's a tag on the end of Christmas. I'm willing to admit that. But yes, so we're talking about the three kings and not the history of Epiphany. Let's get on to the main topic. What do we know about the three kings? Now, obviously, I feel like this is going to be slightly insulting, but I start off and say, well, there wasn't three of them and there wasn't kings. But because we all know that. We get the three because there was free gifts. And when you were a painter in the medieval period, you tend to want to paint a person per a gift, therefore free. And the king's bit, interestingly enough, comes from a holy man in the sort of 200s, who noticed that in Isaiah there was a verse about kings coming to help Jerusalem, as it were, or come to help God in Jerusalem. And he went, wouldn't it be nice if that was a direct prophecy to these Magi that come to see Jesus? And he did the thing that so many people have done throughout history, and they've gone, yep, that is now confirmed because I thought of it and it must be a brilliant idea. And that is how we ended up with 3 kings. I thought we could do a bit of a game here. I'm just going to share the screen. So here I have a bunch of what seems like, I'll be honest, random letters. This is a bunch of names which are possibly the traditional names of the 3 kings. Now, I was going to try work this out so people could try, circle which ones they think it is, but I couldn't work that out. I'm sorry. I know it's been like 4 years worth of pandemic now, but I still haven't mastered Zoom completely. But I thought, could anyone just shout out if you can spot, if you know what the original names are? Anyone got any ideas?
Oh, yeah.
Jasper.
Melchior.
Oh, Melchior. I had Jasper. Balthasar. Okay. So I'll be honest, the traditional 3 are Caspar, Melchior, and Balthasar, but actually all of these names are in fact names used throughout history by different churches for the 3 wise men, for the Magi, as it were. And I love the fact that we come from quite small names like Hor to, I can't read the bottom one because it says I'm screen sharing there, but Dakashera, and lots of sort of variations of each other. It does look like I've sort of just started hitting the keyboard randomly at some points. But yes, these are all the names of the many, many iterations of the Magi throughout history. And they did become a bit of lots and lots of stories came about for the wise men. Did you know for a long time it was believed that, or it was known that it took 12 days for the wise men to get to Bethlehem on their journey, which doesn't sound like an amazing fact, but did you know they didn't have to eat or drink at all for that entire 12-day journey? After Jesus' death, they all 3 decided to move back to Bethlehem, or not Bethlehem, back to Israel, where St. Thomas baptized them. And later on, the Roman emperor's mum went to Israel and found their 3 bodies and took them to Cologne, because apparently where best to put some major players in the Christmas story than a small church in Germany. Obviously, none of that is true. This is all taken from random things, but I just love the fact that over the years, people just sort of keep adding onto it. And it's one of my not passions, but things I love about when I'm researching these things is finding where stories have started and how they've sort of mucked themselves up into the rest of the Christian message. Because obviously those 3 names, the Caspar, Melchior, and Balthasar, all make a big appearance in the We 3 Kings of Orient Are song, which is a surprisingly modern song. So modern, in fact, that if you get the original publication of it, it's got a copyright notice where Henry Hopkins says, if you dare change any of the lyrics to this, I will sue you to the fullest extent of the law. Which seems a bit much, seeing he made it for a little kids production of like an American version of a nativity play. But yes, lots of stuff we sort of has been known about the wise men, which isn't true. But what we do know about them, so they were Magi. Now we've got 2 words for people which in our English which sort of come from Magi. First one is magistrate, and the other one is magician, which seems like quite a large spectrum of things to be, from kids' parties to courtrooms. But let's face it, back in the old days, a lot of these things were all just sort of mixed into one. They were sort of, the wise men, they were the people who looked at the skies. And in fact, sort of one of the traditions is that the Magi came from Chaldea, sort of like, I suppose, in the east where Iraq was now, but they were quite well known for these Magi were in the sort of courts of a lot of emperors and generals, whatever, the important people who would ask them, oh, you know about the skies, tell me what's going to happen next. Which all in all makes them a really odd thing for Matthew to include in his story of Christmas, because a lot of what they were doing is prohibited by the Old Testament. And not only that, but magicians, sorcerers and all that are really sort of disliked in the New Testament. I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent here because I discovered Simon the Sorcerer, who you may remember from Acts as a convert to Christianity, who, after seeing Peter performing miracles, tried to find out how to do them for his own personal gain. Now, what you might not know is he became a bit of a pantomime villain in the early church, and he popped up in an awful lot of stories. In the Acts of Peter, which is definitely a book which shouldn't be included in the Bible, but at some point some people did think, oh, maybe we should listen to this. Peter goes to Rome because Simon the Sorcerer has appeared there and has started causing all sorts of trouble for the early church there. And there's a really great bit in it. I say great, it's not that well written. It's not been very well translated, if I'm honest, but where Peter and Simon refuse to talk to each other and they exchange all of their arguments via talking dog. Peter will tell a dog something, the dog will go tell Simon, Simon would go tell that dog, and the dog would go tell Peter. There was also a point where someone brought back a herring to life. It's a very weird, and I do not recommend that you start reading the Acts of Peter, but I mean, it did help me procrastinate this sermon for about half an hour, if I'm honest. But sorcerers, magicians, really looked down upon by the early church. So why on earth are they somewhat heroes in this story? Well, I suppose part of it is that we're talking about Christmas being for everyone. They didn't need to be already perfect people to come visit Jesus, in the fact that they were, you know, magicians, and even worse, foreigners. The one thing that every society throughout time seems to have come up with a reason to dislike. But even then, God seems to have brought them into the story. And something I really like about them is they're one of the only characters in the Christmas story who this Christmas story isn't thrust upon them. The Mary, Joseph, obviously, their life is entirely upheaved when they receive the news. Zechariah, in the Christmas story, is told something and then can't speak for ages, having his life completely thrown out of whack for 9 months. Even the shepherds are unnecessarily scared on a hill just to be brought in. But yet the wise men, the outsiders of the story, really, they come seeking Jesus, and they're the only people who have come in to be part of the story rather than being dragged in by some other, well, I say some other supernatural source, the supernatural source, I should say. And I think what's also interesting is they came seeking, not knowing the destination. We had that poll at the beginning talking about what we needed for our journey, or what we need when we go on our journey. These guys didn't even have a destination. They sort of went, oh, it must be somewhere in this direction. Well, okay, they went to Jerusalem thinking that's probably the best place to look, but they didn't actually have an address. They didn't actually know where they were going. They just went, which I think is a pretty amazing thing. And also what's great about them is they've come to worship, and in a slightly different way to everyone else who's come to worship Jesus in this thing, because they've come to worship a baby, right? And then they're leaving again. Now, everyone else is coming to worship a baby who's going to become a man at some point, and they believe in all these great things that are going to happen. But the wise men are going to go back off to their own country again afterwards, and probably aren't going to ever be affected by this kid again. It's almost like there's this, I don't know, it's something I thought was slightly odd about it, is they're the few people in the story who aren't going to be impacted outside of the story. They have come purely for the worship aspect of it, because they know who Jesus is. And okay, and then obviously the other part of the story, the important part of the story, is they brought those 3 gifts. Each one being well, 2 ways you can look at it. One is they were important things of the countries that were slightly east of Israel. So you could see this as a bit of a diplomatic mission, as some nice presents that you would bring to other government or king when you were going. But also they had that symbolism to them, didn't they? The fact that it was gold for that this baby was going to be king. It was frankincense that he was holy, he was God, and it was myrrh because he was going to die. Some obviously myrrh always being the butt of the joke of the 3 gifts, isn't it? No one can seem to go on about going, oh, and who wants myrrh? But all very important to the story, because that is what they've brought, is a sort of understanding of what's going to happen. And this is where I'm going to come into, is we talk a lot at this time of year, and by this time of year I mean last month, about the true meaning of Christmas. No one can stop talking about it. What is the true meaning of Christmas? And I'm fairly certain it started off with churches saying, well, you know, because the true meaning of Christmas is Christ. And then it's slowly somehow been morphed by everyone else who goes, yes, but the true meaning of Christmas is family and love and, you know, all that other sort of thing. Everyone's constantly talking about their own true meanings of Christmas. But what is the true meaning of Epiphany? I feel like this is the important question now. And if we go back to its roots of the day that Jesus was baptized, the celebration of Epiphany was about God's declaration of who Jesus was. The true meaning of Epiphany was kind of that declaration. Now, the Magi, when they came with their gifts, they declared who Jesus was. In a similar vein, they are declaring to the world who Jesus is. And I think maybe that should be our true meaning of Epiphany. And the thing is as well, 2/3 of the thing that they declare with those gifts, they declare right at the beginning of the verse when they, gotta get my Bible up again. When they get to Jerusalem and they say, where is the one who was born King of the Jews? We saw the star when it rose and have come to worship him. Right at the beginning, when they're talking, they're already declaring who this baby is going to be. So I'd like to settle that maybe that is the true meaning of Epiphany. And that's the sort of message I want next year when everyone sends me Epiphany cards, which I'm going to start selling at a remarkable thing, because I feel like this is the next big thing, guys. Come on. So I suppose the question is, like the wise men, how are we declaring this Epiphany time? I don't know, there should be, I suppose we can't really add another Christmas time type season on the end for Epiphany. Who wants the 12 days of Epiphany? I feel like we could do it. But maybe what we should be focusing on this time of Epiphany, like the wise men, is how do we declare who Jesus is to the world? I think it's probably quite an old cliche now, isn't it, where we say the only Bible that many people will see is our lives. So maybe now's the time to be thinking about how are our lives reflecting who Jesus is and what we are telling people about that. Yeah, so I'm going to hand back to Catherine now. After what, I'll be honest, feels like far too many facts. But as I said, I did love this book. So